Hello everybody, it's me, Fiona Timms here, otherwise known as White Zulu, and the author of 5 autobiographies. They are all now in video format and available on YouTube. I want to welcome you to a couple of chapters from an autobiography I wrote when I was working at the Centre for Rehabilitation of Wildlife, otherwise known as CROW, in Yellowwood Park near the Steenbank Nature Reserve in Durban. I never got to finish this book as I became too ill to continue writing, but I can give you the chapters I did complete. I'd also like to thank all you dedicated subscribers who post warm comments and give me such encouraging feedback. So sit back, relax, and enjoy another tale from the bushveld. It's coming now. Bear with me. This chapter is called Crow, Gus, the Banded Mongoose. He arrived in the clinic in the spring of 1994. About the size of a mole, his eyes hadn't opened, and his fur looked like suede on his little pink body. He was a baby banded mongoose. Someone had heard a plaintive squeaking coming from a stormwater drain on the outskirts of Durban and had found him apparently abandoned by the troop of about 20 mongooses which used the drain as a burrow. The kind stranger had put him carefully into a shoebox lined with kitchen paper and brought him to our centre for rehabilitation of wildlife. He was icy cold and close to death, so I put him down the front of my uniform blouse. This was standard treatment which I had initiated and our quickest solution to warming infants, birds, and mammals to their correct body temperature. We had successfully revived many a baby monkey and other little creatures, such as fruit bats, tree squirrels, and even the small antelope called a blue duiker, which when newborn is the size of a cat. The babies would warm up to the correct mammal body temperature and be safe and feel secure, as if they were back with their mother. This procedure reduced initial stress and accustomed the little wild animal to one's heartbeat and scent. It also made them feel certainly made the first feed less traumatic, as the baby was relaxed, warm, and more accustomed to a human by then. The only drawback was that occasionally a nurse got nipped by one of her charges in some quite painful places. One afternoon I had a baby banded mongoose tucked down the front of my shirt. They get their teeth very young. As I went about my clinic work, one of those thunderstorms which appear so suddenly on a summer's afternoon in South Africa and drench everything began to brew, and I had to bring in a bunch of young weaned vervet monkeys from their playpen outside. My mongoose had been fast asleep, but was woken up by the shrieking of the monkeys as I grabbed each one by the tail. The only way to handle baby vervets without injuring them or oneself. I got sharply nipped by the mongoose inside my shirt and under my bra as he panicked from the noise of the screaming monkeys. Very painful. Mongooses are fascinating small mammals and make up approximately 70% of all carnivores. And with 14 species, this is the largest subfamily in southern Africa. On game viewing trips and safaris, the smaller carnivores tend to be overlooked in favor of the large predators such as lions, leopards, and cheetah, or wild dogs and hyenas. Like the wild dog, the gregarious mongooses, such as the banded and dwarf mongoose, as well as surrogates, which is the proper name for meerkats, have evolved societies which are among the most complex and cooperative to be found among mammals. The banded mongoose, Mungus mungo, is very similar to the Indian banded mongoose, the species made famous by Rudyard Kipling's Rikki Tikki Tavi. If anyone's read his books, well worth it. After half an hour, I was delighted to detect some movement and hear a faint squeaking from the new arrival. I made a solution of warm milk enriched with beaten egg yolk and fed it to him using a syringe. I was so pleased to see his tiny pink tongue lapping at the mixture, and after he'd managed a couple of milliliters, I gently wiped him all over with a warm, damp cotton wool pad. His mother would have licked him, but I drew the line there, especially under his tiny tail. There was a limit to what I'd do to raise my charges successfully. I was rewarded by a faint purring. Although mongooses are of the Viveridae family in the order of carnivores, they are more closely related to wild cats than to rodents. I named him Gus, and he became a part of my life. He slept in a closed basket next to my bed. He would have preferred to have been in my bed, but I made him a substitute mother out of a 2-liter Coke bottle filled with very hot water from the bathtub and wrapped a towel round it. I tucked Gus into the folds of the towel. During the night, as the water cooled, Gus would burrow further and further towards the warmth until, in the mornings, upon being woken by furious squeaking, I would unroll the towel to release him. I had adapted a doll's bottle by enlarging the hole in the teat with a scalpel, and he would gulp down 5 ml, the equivalent of a teaspoon, of milk formula with gusto. After 4 days, his eyes opened and tiny, sharp teeth appeared. His fur had grown and was a reddish-brown color, and showing the first signs of his bands, a series of narrow, darker stripes across his back. The very second he was able to see, he had established every detail of my cottage, especially the small pink geckos with which I shared my accommodation, which was an asbestos tool shed adapted to be a dwelling of 2 rooms and a bathroom. I enjoyed having geckos as well as the big hairy baboon spiders in my small prefab hut, because they kept down the numbers of mosquitoes which invaded to plague me after darkness fell. Gus liked geckos too, and would follow them, chittering hopefully as they scurried well out of reach across my ceilings and along the walls. He never gave up hope that one would lose its footing and drop down for him to catch. Unfortunately, the only gecko ever to fall from the ceiling chose to do so above a pot of vegetable soup I was boiling on my hot plate. I didn't have a proper kitchen. I just had an electric frying pan and a hot plate and a little fridge and a blender. And that was mostly for the animal food. Perhaps the steam had made the area above slippery, or it had been overcome by the steam vapors, but it dropped with a plop into the pressure cooker saucepan, which had lost its lid. It had taken me a whole day off to make that Scotch broth soup, which would then last me a week. Those are the jets going by, if you hear any noise. They do it every day. We're on the direct range to the bombing site, the practice bombing site, so they'll bother us. I'd filled it with barley, lentils, split peas, and all the vegetables I could find, adding a nice big marrow bone for stock, seasoned and simmered it for a couple of hours. Now it had a poached gecko in it, floating palely among the sliced carrots. I hovered over the pressure cooker for some time, debating whether to fish the moribund gecko out and throw it away, keeping the soup, and pretending to myself that it had never been there. But the longer I deliberated, the more I decided to throw the whole lot out and start again. Fortunately, we got our vegetables free as they were donated to us and the animals by the kind Muslims at the big Indian market in Durban. Weeks old, Gus was about the size of my fist and lived on my shoulder. He accompanied me in all my clinic duties. If I was feeding owl chicks with chopped up, thawed, day-old chicks using forceps, he would run down my arm to investigate. And if I was handling monkeys, he watched from the safety of the space between my uniform collar and my neck, often hanging on to my epaulettes with his sharp little claws for extra purchase, when the going got rough and I was having to catch a reluctant patient. The only place Gus was banned from was, for sterile purposes, the operating theatre, when we performed any surgical procedures. Then he would be handed to a willing volunteer, where he would settle quite contentedly on his or her shoulder. On one occasion, we had a television film crew from 50/50 in the clinic, covering the arrival of the two-week-old orphan baby white rhino, which we were hand-raising. The reporter who was presenting the program fell instantly in love with Gus, and he spent the entire 3 days filming events, happily tucked up in her ponytail. At home with me when I was off duty, Gus busied himself by quietly rolling all the potatoes and onions out of the bottom shelf of my vegetable rack and stashing them in my shoes. Or he would watch me prepare my supper from his perch on my shoulder, giving a running commentary by squeaking with various degrees of excitement as I peeled and chopped vegetables. Garlic was his favourite, and he'd go into ecstasies of loud squeaks as the aroma wafted up to his eager, twitching nose. By then I was weaning Gus and gave him a saucer of raw mincemeat mixed with raw beaten egg. Once he had his nose in the dish, he was so overcome with eagerness that by the end of his meal, he was covered in food and had to be wiped down with a wet cloth while he struggled indignantly. Gus only ever bit me once. It was on one of those occasions when he'd practically rolled in his dinner with pleasure while he was eating, and was such a mess that I had to bath him. I filled a 5-litre plastic ice cream tub with warm water and dipped him carefully in to remove some of the encrusted food before soaping him with baby shampoo. Poor Gus. He panicked and, squealing and struggling, sank his needle-like teeth into my thumb. I completed his bath, and while I dried him with a towel, he belly crawled, dragging his back feet out behind him, in the grovelling form of apology which mongooses do to senior troop members, to make me understand that he hadn't meant to bite me. We then played his favourite game, where I would grab at his tail and he would pretend to savage my hand, then run off and do a sort of victory lap, squeaking happily and racing round the grass mat on the floor of my hut. Finally, exhausted, he lay in the palm of my hand while I watched the evening news on television, purring like a kitten while I stroked the fur on his round belly. That's all for this time. More about Gus in the next chapter. Goodbye. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for listening to my videos and my stories of my life. And I want to thank John Moslane for being what I call the sound engineer, but I'm sure there's a more professional word for it. However, faithful, and for 4 years now, I think, he has been here for me every Wednesday. Well, I think it's Wednesdays, but once a week to record 2 chapters of whichever book it is I'm reading. And without him, this couldn't be done. So a big thank you to John. Also, Sean van Vuren, we send the videos to him. Sorry, I'm not reading this. I'm just doing it off the cuff. And my brain is a bit tumor. And Sean uploads them to the YouTube channel where you can find them all in playlists. He does it beautifully. And I want to thank them both for all the help that they give me. Well, it's not help. They do everything for me. And it's a great asset. So also, I have a website called whitezulubook.com, obviously www in front of it, but you'll find it there. Quite easy to find. Johnny Clegg's called The White Zulu. Mine's called White Zulu. And you will find on my website, you'll find all kinds of photographs going way back to when my ancestors settled in the Cape, 1652. Well, not photographs of them, but descriptions. This photograph of my grandmother's wedding, and lovely, lovely photos of the farm we still own. My sister sent me a photograph this morning of the farm in midsummer, and she says how beautiful it's looking. I've had a lot of rain. So Just want to thank my helpers, John and Sean, to thank you all for listening, and also please share this with everybody else. Hit the like button and enjoy. Goodbye.